Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Krumwiede, Dean of Architecture at California College of the Arts. Welcome to Hip Hop Architecture in Dialogue with Sekou Cooke and Tajai Massey. This is the 5th event in our fall 2020 lecture series titled Remaking, through which we're reflecting upon the work we must do now, both here at CCA Architecture and in the discipline at large, to remake architecture and work together to co-imagine a just future. Before we begin, I'd like to read a land acknowledgement. California College of the Arts campuses are located in Huichin and Yelamu, also known as Oakland and San Francisco, respectively, on the unceded territories of the Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who have continuously lived upon this land since time immemorial. We recognize the historic discrimination and violence inflicted upon indigenous peoples in California and the Americas, including their forced removal from ancestral lands and the deliberate and systematic destruction of their communities and culture. CCA honors indigenous peoples, past, present, and future, here and around the world, and we wish to pay our respect to local elders, including those of the lands from which you're joining us virtually today. I'm very excited tonight to launch a new presenting partnership with the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. Before I pass this to Elizabeth Gessel, Public Program Director at MOAD, I'd like to tell you about the next 2 events in our series and let you know where you can learn more about CCA architecture and our lecture series. I'll add this in the chat, but if you visit scaffold.architecture.cca.edu, you can find out about our programs and hear stories and read stories about the activities that are taking place across the division. The next event in our series, this Wednesday, October 7th at 1 p.m., is the second presentation in a series called Bracket Takes Action, co-presented with the Daniels faculty at the University of Toronto. And next Monday, we'll have a lecture by Mario Gooden, professor at Columbia University and author of Dark Space at 6:30 p.m. That will be our second event produced with MOAD. With that, I'd like to thank Sekou and Tajai for joining us tonight and MOAD for sharing this opportunity to hear from them with us here at CCA. And now I'll give you Elizabeth Gessel.
Hi everyone, my name's Elizabeth Gessel and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora here in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. We're delighted to be partnering with CCA Architecture for tonight's program, Hip Hop Architecture and Dialogue, as well as next week's talk with Mario Gooden. MOAD is currently closed to the public, but we are definitely making up for it with lots of online public programs. This week alone, following tonight's co-presentation, we have 2 events on Wednesday, Inside the Artist Studio with Naeem Brown, and The Rhythmic Roots of Afro-Latin Music with John Santos. On Thursday, we have a family art workshop and an open mic poetry night. Friday, you'll have the opportunity to view a conversation with a real live Lord from the UK in our Conversations Across the Diaspora series with Lord Michael Hastings. And later that day, our chef in residence, Bryant Terry, will be chopping it up with George McCalman. On Sunday, we meet for the African Diaspora Film Club, where we'll be discussing the award-winning documentary on Lorraine Hansberry, Sighted Eyes, Feeling Heart. We really do have something for everyone, and you can find information about all of these programs on moadsf.org. We currently have a digital exhibition you can find on our website titled Meet Us Quickly, Painting Justice from Prison, featuring the work of incarcerated artists at San Quentin. When we do return to our building in January 2021, 2 of our 4 opening exhibitions will be work by CCA instructors. Sam Vernon, assistant professor in the print media program, will have her installation and solo exhibition, Impasse of Desires, on view. And David Huffman, associate professor in the painting and drawing department, will show his solo exhibition, Terra Incognita. We hope you join us for upcoming programs and exhibitions, and I hope you enjoy the dialogue this evening. And now I invite Jason Anderson, Associate Chair of the Graduate Program in Architecture, to introduce tonight's program. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's a distinct pleasure to be able to introduce you to these 2 amazing and prolific gentlemen who grace our event this evening. It's also an honor for California College of the Arts to partner with the Museum of the African Diaspora. Tajai Massey, or simply Tajai as the larger audience knows him, is an American rapper, producer, architectural designer, and entrepreneur. His hip-hop career of nearly 3 decades and more than 15 albums by my count has powerfully influenced people in Oakland, in the Bay Area, and the world. His original group of A+, Festo D, Opio, and Tajai is known as the Souls of Mischief. Souls is part of a larger collective, Hieroglyphics, which also includes Del, the Funky Homo Sapien, Casual, Pep Love, Domino, and DJ Torre. Tajai's success and fame in hip hop at an early age didn't stop him from continuing his education, and in fact, it might have fueled it even more. He graduated from Stanford University with a bachelor in anthropology and followed this up with a master's of architecture from UC Berkeley. He's been working full-time as an architect with Savvy Design Build, where he's been for 6 years, but this has neither stopped nor diluted his attention to his rap career. He's released 3 albums amongst different collectives since beginning to balance his 2 professional careers, and he dropped the solo album Machine Language while he was also studying for his master's in architecture. Tajai, with the rest of the Hyro crew, puts together the hugely successful day of music, food, art, and community, Hyro Day. The first Hyro Day in 2012 was held on September 3rd, or 9/3, as reference to 93 till infinity. Hyro Day has had such a positive impact on the city of Oakland that then Mayor Jean Quan proclaimed Hieroglyphics as a bright spot of the city of Oakland and officially named September 3rd as Hyro Day. Last year, Rap Noir, the duo of Tajai with Unjust, released the track By Design to support the National Organization of Minority Architects and the announcement that NOMA would be holding the 2020 convention in Oakland, California. I'll drop the link to NOMA and the conference in chat. The event is only $25 for students. And if you happen to be a student in Oakland, at an Oakland high school like Tajai and I were, and you can't go to that, drop me a line. We'll make a way to figure out how to get you into that conference. Rap Noir is currently finishing work on a new studio album to be released soon. And I believe some of Tajai's tracks, we can hear a hint of how he looks at the world now as an architect. And through tonight's conversations, we will hear even more about being immersed in the creation, production, and progression of hip hop informs Tajai's design and practices. Sekou Cooke is a licensed architect, a researcher, an educator, and a curator. He's currently an assistant professor at Syracuse University School of Architecture, where he teaches exploratory design studios and seminars. His research into the emergent field of hip-hop architecture explores how the tenets of hip-hop culture have and can have an impact on the built environment and give voice to the marginalized and underrepresented within design practice. He has lectured and spoken at the New York Center for Architecture, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Harvard Graduate School of Design, Columbia University, NOMA's conferences, and Cornell University, as well as many others. He's been featured in ArcConnect, ArcDaily, Curbed, ArcConnect, and the Architect's newspaper. Sekou holds a B.Arch from Cornell University, where he first produced a significant step towards understanding hip-hop architecture within his thesis work, and then continued his education at Harvard's GSD with a Master's of Architecture degree. In 2018, Sekou organized and curated Close to the Edge, the birth of hip-hop architecture, which was hosted at the AIA New York Center for Architecture and migrated to Springbox in St. Paul, Minnesota. He's featured in the MoMA's current show, Reconstructions, Architecture and Blackness in America, and is currently finishing a book of hip-hop architecture, which is scheduled to be released in 2021. As we begin our program, I'll remind the audience that we'll be taking question and answers, or we'll be taking our questions in our Q&A box, and we'll be holding those questions till the end of the conversation to pose those to Sekou and Tajai. Thank you all for joining, and Sekou and Tajai, please take it away.
Great. Thanks for that introduction, Jason. That was really quite eloquently put. This was definitely one of those introductions that I'm like, who's that person that he's talking about, right? And thanks, Elizabeth, for co-sponsoring the event with Moad, and for Keith for being the primary host at CCA Architecture Division. So in thinking about this, it was really just wanting it to be a dialogue, not just a dialogue between you and me, Tajai, but between hip hop and architecture. And I know you embody both right now. I think I have a little bit more, chips on my shoulder in the architecture world thus far, and you have definitely, eons more hip hop cred than I will ever have. But part of this is, getting a little bit beyond just the mere definition of what hip hop architecture is, right? Because that's been something that I've been talking about publicly for about 6 years now. The show at the Center for Architecture was really to answer that big question, what does it look like? And I think people came from that knowing that it was a plurality of things, it wasn't just one thing. And, the book is definitely the kind of, hopefully my last statement about having to define what hip hop architecture is. So now it's time for us to build from there, right? If anybody out there is still looking for a definition of what hip hop architecture is, think about hip hop culture, not just hip hop music, and think about hip hop culture as something that transcends cultural exploration in music and dance and art, but gets into architecture. It's hip hop culture in built form. Okay, so now that that's done, let's get to it, right? So Tajai, my first question for you is, I was saying that I was reading back some of the transcripts of the presentation you made at the Center for Architecture, which was great. That was another one that was like just laying out concepts and not a whole lot of slides or imagery. But one of the first things you said is, I'm a world famous rapper. So let's start there. You are a world famous rapper. Like the Hiero is global, and now you're gonna now you're like in the work of becoming an architect. Like, what's that about?
Well, first of all, good to see you in virtual reality, and thank you, CCA. Thank you, Moed. I'm just happy to be here. World famous rapper. I think that as now someone who spent more of his life as a public figure than as a, I came out as a child, at 18. So it's been 27 years of being known as just my first name, Tajai. That in hindsight, I should have probably picked a really cool rap name so I could delineate between the people I know and don't know through music. But I think being a world famous rapper right now, especially in these times and what hip hop has evolved to be as far as a global phenomenon, as far as something that is not just this sort of underground movement, but something that really imbues all of our lived life right now as I guess the biggest music currently with regard to sales, with regard to just its coverage worldwide. It's just a great honor and also a great responsibility, I think, to actually represent more than just being a rapper, more than just being a person who puts words together in a certain way over beats, but also being just a human being in this sort of world society who has a voice that is expressed not only through the music, but also through, as you spoke of earlier, the built environment, also through the artwork and art artifacts that we create, and really lifestyle as we talk about hip hop culture and lifestyle. So I think it's a really great position to be in, but also a precarious position because I feel that to a large extent, hip hop has been defined by the outside from its inception. As soon as it sort of became a thing, all of a sudden there are all these labels and descriptors and all these things placed upon it. So I love the fact that right now with social media, with these tools that we can reach everyday public with, we can actually define things for ourselves. And I think that the work that you're doing is very important, especially in this sort of nascent period of quote unquote hip hop architecture that someone from within the culture, someone who's participated in the culture is giving a voice to and creating these definitions, because it's been mislabeled and misrepresented. I mean, even the fact that we have to explain that hip hop is more than just rap music in 2020, when we're 40, almost 50 years in, is a big thing, but it's true because hip hop is a culture. You know, there are the elements, but also there are all those sort of things that lie in the interstitial areas between the four elements.
Those architecture words. It's all right.
I'm just very humbled to be able to be one of the people who is still around and able to define these things actively.
Yeah. And architecture is big, right? Like it's a lot older than 50 years, right? Like architecture is like this deeply entrenched thing, especially when we talk about architecture in America or architecture in the Western world, how we've now conceived of or reconceived of what architecture really is in our modern era. We're really thinking about it in like one very specific way, right? Like people outside of architecture, you say architecture, they start thinking about very specific things, very specific types of buildings, you know, neoclassical buildings, you know, even the current administration tried to put out a doctrine that said all government buildings are gonna conform to this one standard because that's what they think about architecture. You know, we've been lucky enough to be within academic institutions and in practice. So we know that architecture has a broader definition, but still even that definition is really limited. So some of the things that we're doing here with trying to define what hip hop architecture is, or more importantly, present what hip hop architecture could mean to the future of architecture, really is quite different. It's kind of trying to stake new territory. So like, what's the importance of that territory? Like how do we get to a place where hip hop really can define itself as architecture and within architecture and around architecture?
Well, you stole one of my questions for you.
Right? That was a question, but I mean, probably one of those hypotheticals, but no, go for it.
No, that's the big thing here. And I think that fortunately with hip hop as a culture that's sort of created, you know, post-apocalyptic, post trickle down economics, you know, post Bronx is burning, post all these things, and created sort of from the scraps of this kind of I think of The Message by Grandmaster Flash. There's broken glass everywhere, you know, like just this sort of apocalyptic Mad Max Thunderdome kind of image that, you know, as a kid growing up in California, I hadn't even been to New York City, so I'm thinking this place looks like, you know, Road Warrior or something crazy. But
it probably did in the 70s.
Yeah, I mean, judging from the pictures and all the art exhibits and photos, it really did. But I think it presents a since we're in this post-apocalyptic thing, but we have all these tools and all these artifacts and all these pieces of this thing that fell before whatever it was, pre-1970s New York, and we put it together kind of like a gumbo, or we've pieced these things together. It's so broad that it's hard to really lock down, but it's also promising because you can grab a piece from here, grab a piece from there, and create something new, which is what hip hop is all about, right? You know, you look at the elements of DJing, they're taking records and taking pieces of these records and turning them into new music. You look at rapping, it's like we're taking the same English language that Shakespeare used or Chaucer used, and really bringing it to life without any singing talent. You look at graffiti, you know, we're taking cubism and, you know, just all these different color palettes that are clashing and pasting together, and then putting them into on subway cars or on the sides of walls, and, you know, making the world an art gallery. And you look at the dancing, even you've got capoeira in there, you've got kung fu in there, you've got all these different things, and turn it into something new. So I'm saying that it's very hard to lock down because it's something that's made up of everything. So it's broad, kind of just like architecture, and huge and wide open. However, it's very promising because anything goes. So I know that's kind of I don't know if I'm dancing around it or if I didn't really narrow anything down, but I really feel like we're in a really cool time because we're able, since we're not right in the beginning and the nascent period of the birth period of it, we can have a little bit of perspective looking back on it. But because we have all these new tools, I mean, 3D printing and, all the new colors and great spray can colors and all the new music and Pro Tools and new samplers and all that, it's just like, it's something that it's just becoming more and more vast and more easy to manipulate by those of us who are in this field, that it's wide open. And I feel that way about architecture in general, as well as architecture from the perspective of someone who's entrenched in hip hop.
Yeah, I think that the idea that it isn't one thing and that it defies definition, and it's always pushing back against outside definers trying to make it this one thing. That's what gives it life. That's what gives it authenticity. That's what makes it breathe. In this earlier conversation I was having at the event at Columbia GSAP, we were really talking about how Blackness refuses a kind of legibility, right? It's not a singularity. It's this plurality. It touches all these various elements, and the problem is that we've grown so accustomed to being defined by a predominantly white world, or not that the world is predominantly white, but the world that we live in, the Western world that we ascribe ourselves to, is predominantly white in its conception. So now that lens is, as we were saying, is trying to define what hip hop is. It's trying to define what architecture is, and it's trying to define and again, it's going to try to define what hip hop architecture is. So the more nimble we stay, the more versatile we are, the more that we just kind of go out there and just do it, just kind of make it and present it and curate it and challenge the norms, then the more active and lively it is. And it might leave people in the wind, right? It might leave people scratching their heads, but who cares, right? When African Bambaataa was dressing in this futuristic stuff, and these guys dressing in like fur boots on stage, lots of people were scratching their heads and didn't know what that was, but they were making it. They were having a really authentic expression of themselves.
I think defying convention and sort of remaining undefined has been also a survival tactic. Yeah. Because the way it is with just capitalism in general, but especially late capitalism, once they figure out how to bottle it and sort of redistribute it and sell, they're going to sell it back to you at a premium. And if you can't afford it, you might not be able to survive anymore. So I think that with Blackness in general, with hip hop in specific, remaining, as you said, sort of nimble and agile, and just doing, manifesting rather than sort of explaining it to bits, parsing it down so small that it's nothing, is so important to maintain the liveliness and life. That is kind of the life's blood of this, is really remaining undefined, and finding new ways of presenting and representing over and over and over again. And we talked earlier. Can you give me the brother's name that was at the speech that at the event we did?
Nate Williams.
Yeah, what he said about sampling, resampling.
Godfather of hip hop architecture.
Yeah. I would say that was what I walked away as far as the process of sampling, resampling, layering, overlaying, going to the drawing board, coming back and forth. Though that is a huge part of this practice, and I think that's going to be what makes it all nimble and agile and ever changing and really layered. I mean, like literally layered, figuratively layered, and rich because it's layered. And I feel like that is something that, as a musician who makes hip hop music, seeing it constantly renew itself and constantly change itself and constantly redefine itself is always, for me as someone who participates, is very inviting and exciting. I know a lot of other guys in my quote unquote rap generation, you know, hate it because it's like, that's not hip hop. That's not hip hop. Oh, that's not. But then even as these sort of angry old men, at a certain point, you got to be like, oh, that's, I like something, some gem comes through in this sort of repurposed mishmash thing. And you're like, oh, okay. I see what the youngsters are doing. I kind of feel that. Or, you know, your kid plays one song that sort of defines them and they love, since now it's sort of crossing these generational lines. And you say, wow, okay, that feeling that I got at your age, or, you know, I started rapping when I was 8, so it's 83. So I still personally, when I make my music, get that same feeling when I finish certain things. And that's when I know it's, well, it's, in my opinion, good or real or whatever you want to call it. And I see that in a lot of the other musicians who participate, and a lot of that stuff I can't do or wouldn't do, but I get the same feeling. And so I always get reaffirmed that, well, this is alive, this is moving, this is culture, this is what I'm talking about. Like, you know what I'm saying, you know, not the question, but the actual statement, you know. I got into architecture for that same reason. You know, I would be somewhere and just, it would have me in the same level of awe that, say, some super lyrical KRS-One, Cool G Rap kind of verse had, where I'd look at it and I'd just be like, I've got to enter that building. You know, it's the same as I got to finish this song or finish this verse. I've got to see what else lies beyond it. Then you go inside these buildings. A lot of them are in the canon, you know, a lot of them are not. And you're just like amazed at the attention to detail, the way that it interacts with you, you know, the way that it interacts with the world, and how it is a representative of the time and place it was created in. And so every time we have these talks, it's like I'm taken aback by the size of the task ahead. Yeah. And like I said, sort of humbled by maybe my position in it, or by the amount of work that I'm really gonna have to undertake to make what this concept a reality. So
well, maybe a little bit of pushback might be that, you know, how you're describing architecture, how you're describing these spaces, you know, at least your initial impression of the space is from somebody outside of architecture looking in, right? And then those modes of practice are from architect's point of view are commonplace. These are things that almost anybody can do, like attention to detail or awe-inspiring spaces or anything like that. Like, none of those things are inherently gonna lend itself to hip hop. So do we have to go back to these processes that you're talking about, the processes that are deeply embedded in hip hop, like sampling or layering, or taking something old and making it new, or reclaiming lost histories, right? Is that the space that we have to really focus most of our attention? Because those are the things that ultimately made hip hop what it is. Not just, you know, something that's cool, that is beautiful, that everybody loves, but something that is really embedded with deep processes that didn't just start in the hip hop generation. These are processes or modalities or practices that go way back to, you know, deep into the African diaspora, right? Mm-hmm. These are reminding ourselves of our African roots, of our Caribbean heritage, of our, you know, cross-Atlantic transition, right? So how do we have to really focus in these limited realms that are all identifiably hip hop, or can we just practice like any other Western architect might practice?
That's a big question.
I know I'm always sorry. I'm going to give you time to ask me questions too.
Yeah. I would say when you look at hip hop as a culture and as a cultural expression, because it is created to a large extent by people without formal music training, by people without access to the academy. It really is very similar. We're encountering these things that already existed, and then sort of ingesting them and repurpose, and then and pushing them back out or reflecting them through the lens of our body, our experience, that transatlantic experience, this unbroken chain of millennia of human beings and ways of living that now ends up in this sort of modern wilderness of America, or now the world. So I don't think that they're really discrete in that, you know, like it's almost like when and I hate to let's say Rapper's Delight, right? That's chic good times, right?
Yeah, we
you
can
know, it's
break down Rapper's Delight if you want to. We can do that.
but it's Good Times by Chic, right? And so it is a disco record that's chopped up or layered back and forth, and then added to with these MCs who have gotten their talents from, you know, public art schools, from their parents, from church, from all these things. And the disco record was created by Chic, you know, Nile Rodgers, one of the greatest musicians of our times, of any type of musician, you see, who's probably classically trained or self-taught. I don't know his particular story, but there's that lineage and tradition there. I'm just saying that as someone in the hip hop community, I feel like if I enter a place and consume that place, I may not even be getting the original architects' complete idea. But what I'm going to do is I maybe freak it, you know, tweak it, whatever you want to call it, bend it, loop it, reshape it, so that its use serves my purpose as a hip hop cat. And I think that's what the graffiti, a train for graffiti is, you know. I mean, that's a mobile art gallery now, you know, and the more you're up, the greater exposure you get, the more trains you're on. Now you've turned your entire city, or maybe even beyond when you talk about the PATH trains and those that left the city, into an art gallery. You talk about a park jam. This is a place where people were supposed to congregate and, you know, just sort of observe. And no, you've repurposed the light to create it, make it an audio experience now. Yeah. And you've turned it into a regular event that happens over and over again. So now it's a community center, not in the edifice way, but in the literal, it's the center of the community where community comes to congregate. So I think that's really where the quote unquote hip hop comes in, is that I'm sort of a lens, or we're a lens that refracts the light that's shined by these very old traditions, you know, ancient architectural traditions, and maybe we always hark back to Greece or maybe Egypt and these things, ancient cultural traditions with regard to interaction, music, and all these things, and sort of these modern traditions of how we congregate, how we move around, how we present ourselves, etc. So to me, I think that's where the hip hop is in the repurposing and relayering of things that may already exist. And then now we're at this point now where, okay, we've got this entrenched culture that's been around for, you know, a few decades, half a century. And now we are becoming designers. We are becoming professors or academic, these things. And we have a different perspective. And now what is that perspective is where we are now. One of the questions I was going to ask you is, you know, what in the inhabited world, in the spatial world, what does hip hop architecture look like to you? You know, and I think with the exhibit that you created, you know, I walked in like, yeah, you know, like, yeah, you know, like it just clicked immediately, you know, but, and maybe that was just the basis and the foundation. And then you build on that, or now that we've looked at that, we say, okay, I take this panel from the subway train And now I have a corrugated wall in the house, you know, that's made of this or the steel. And this is how I display my art, maybe, you know, but we're at that point now where, okay, as practitioners and livers of this culture, now how do we bring this into our practice in a way that's not necessarily, it may be kitschy, whatever. This is sampling. This is redoing. This is the drawing board. I'm gonna stop at this. I think the coolest part about hip hop is you see the drawing, like that, the drawing board sometimes is the actual thing. It's not necessarily even the inhabited space that is the thing. It's the process that is the hip hop thing. You know, when you listen to Audio 2, MCMI, you could call me Milk. Like the drum track was a mistake. You know, he sampled it wrong. It was supposed to be sampled a certain way. It came out another way, and it's one of the most iconic beats ever in hip hop. So I think that's really cool, is that we're gonna make a lot of mistakes, and some of them might be the greatest mistakes ever made.
Yeah. Did you see that video about those words on that track, by the way? That is like he broke. There's a video about how he like there's a line that everybody gets wrong, but that he broke the bar and went on the other side.
I'm, you know, as Hieroglyphics, we're technicians. A+ at whatever, he was maybe 11, 12 years old. He's always known that. And he's always, you know, like that, that's one of, maybe that was one of the secrets that made us better with our music, is that, oh, we can break the bar up like this and it works, but people may not understand it. But hey, I'm just speaking English. And if you look close enough, it makes sense. But yeah, I saw that. And I thought, I remember A+ explaining that to me as a child. Okay. Like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But it wasn't something I just found out. I've known this for the past probably 30 years. So it was really weird to me to see other MCs who I, you know, deem very prominent, very skilled MCs not understand that. Because I think that break right there was something we kind of incorporated in our style and makes our style different. If you listen to how we rock, we do that often. You know, that is one of the tricks in the bag.
Yeah, well, we're getting a little insider-ish here, but I guess that's part of it too, is like speaking a language publicly that not everybody's going to understand, and then there's codes and references layered into the language, right? That some people get, references that only a few people gonna get, and you know, if you know, if you get it, you get it, and if you don't, that's fine, right?
But that's just like Masons, right? Masons, you know, you look at a Scottish Rite temple or a certain temple, hey, it's just a place I might go to a cotillion at. But to somebody who's initiated in this secret society or whatever, they see the cornerstone, they see all the symbols, all those different things. So there's that too.
Get back to your question though, about what does hip hop architecture look like? And the exhibit was really trying to answer that question, right? And the funny thing is, and not just, so it's trying to answer the question in two ways. One, let me bring 30 or 40 examples of what other people have thought it looked like and put them all in the same space at the same time, not just images and photographs or built work and drawings and painting, some of them, but and collages, of course, but models and videos and audios and all of that, make it a fully immersive experience, so that you recognize that hip hop architecture doesn't just look like each of these images on the wall, but it looks like the kind of collective experience of all of this. But there's another, and then the other part of it was making the exhibit, like the design of the space itself, reflect my own personal interpretation of what a hip hop architectural space might look like, a hip hop architectural gallery. So yeah, it was definitely had to have authentic graffiti on the wall. So we had to get Chino, like a real legendary graffiti artist, to actually spray paint on the walls. And we didn't even really remove the previous exhibition. We kind of had what I call a dirty de-install of what was there before. So that was like traces of the past, traces of what was there. And then he spray painted on top of that. And then we're gonna have a shipping container, right? Something that has been used before and it's gonna get reused, and it's gonna get chopped up, and it's sampled, and it's put on the wall. And, you know, the evergreen logo is kind of visible sometimes, but not kind of visible. And we're using that to cover up parts of the graffiti. So it's layered on top of it. Sometimes you're seeing it, sometimes you're not. And it's in the space in a kind of awkward way. It's levitating above your head. You know, it's breaking the glass wall that separates the mezzanine from the main space. And so all of those, and then the images are layered on top of that. So all of those are it was my attempt at really immersing myself in the question of how do you create a real hip hop space. But there's kind of two byproducts of that in my reflection on it now, 2 years later. One is that, you know, somebody could then go and say, okay, now I got it. I have the answer. This is what hip hop architectural space looks like. So I'm going to get myself a shipping container. I'm going to get myself a spray can. I'm going to spray paint my walls, layer some shipping containers on my walls, and then frame some images and put it on there. Now I have successfully packaged hip hop architecture, and I've duplicated that and multiplied it, and I can actually practice that over and over again, and then brand myself as a hip hop architect, and I'm gonna sell this as a commodity to the world. That that in and of itself would have completely missed the point, right? That would have just broken the back of anything that hip hop architecture is really supposed to be. Because if anything at all, it has to be authentic, so it has to be pure and true from the heart, and two, it has to be temporal. It can't be something that exists in two spaces at the same time. It has to always reinvent itself and change itself. So for that and other reasons, you know, in the fact that it was kind of in an institution, you know, all these things were by permission, all these things were kind of sanctioned by the Center for Architecture, didn't want to destroy their walls, didn't want to destroy their floors. The remix of that show, when we went to St. Paul, to me was, you know, one of the most hip hop things ever to happen to me as an architect, right? In my architectural practice. One, we used a space that was like a garage space, a leftover garage space of a space that used to be a used car dealership. And it was about to turn into an art center. And so we could do anything in that space, anything goes, right? And then the kicker was that the contractor, the installer, who was supposed to install the thing, we gave him 2 weeks to install the whole thing. And he spent 12 of those days not knowing what to do, right? He's like, I can't figure this whole thing out. I can't figure out all these different pieces, all these drawings. And then 2 days before the opening, I fly to St. Paul, waiting to see what the progress was. And everything was in shambles, right? Everything was all fucked up. It was really, really intense. And yeah, I realized that he didn't know how to read drawings. And so the first thing we did was, you know, and I was looking around, it was like, not only is everything not done, but everything that's done is done wrong. So first thing I did was fire him. Right? He was fired. And second, I was like, okay, I got 24 hours before this thing opens. How many volunteers do we have? How many people can we come in? And we tore that whole shit down and put it all back ourselves. Like, these hands were putting it all in and improvising along the way, figuring things out along the way. So it was like the whole thing was like a live performance. The thing going up was like an active piece. And it wasn't this static moment. It was just this thing that we're creating before the public comes in and then sees it. And then it kept transforming over time again, because there were all these local community organizations coming in and experiencing it and doing different things in it. But how do you do that? You know, how do you replicate that, right? How do you do like a 40-story tower with a really clear budget for a client with that modality, right? With this improvisational loose, you know, by the seat of your pants kind of aesthetic, kind of attitude, right? Like, you know,
I'm in awe at this story. This is, but that's like the hip hopest thing ever, you know, like, wow.
That's what I'm saying.
You know, like, well, okay. I mean, that kind of define it, especially the part where you said you have volunteers come in and participate, tear it down and put it together. Cause I think people really forget about the communal aspect of hip hop, and that it's not like, I think because we have commodified the culture and made it about a product, which is a record, or a product, which is a song. And then on top of that, further made it into a solo thing rather than a group thing, that we've gotten away from the fact that, no, this has always been a community oriented and community undertaken process. But I mean, I hope, did you film everything that you did there? Because that sounds.
No, we didn't film the process of it.
Oh, wow.
I have some pictures of before, during, and after, and yeah, and I wrote extensively about it. It's actually the outro of my book. Like, that whole experience was how I summarized everything in my book. You know, I'll take the chance to plug the book here. That's coming out in early next spring. But yeah, you had other questions? Maybe one more question for me before we turn it over to the.
I don't want to go too far off base, but, you know, hip hop. We think of Kool Herc, we think of Grandmaster Flash, we think of toasting, all that. You know, I work for Maxwell Beaumont and Andre King, two very proud yardies. You know what I'm saying? Two very proud Jamaican guys. Like, the guy came in, Andre came in with a shirt that said "Just Do It" on, like a Jamaican Nike shirt. So they represent regularly. So as a Jamaican, you know, so the foundation of hip hop is your home place, you know, your home place. And I think that historians have finally recognized this.
Yeah, I'm glad you're recognizing it. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, I consider myself, you know, a part of the culture. You can't not understand where the culture comes from. But my question is, what part of your specifically Jamaican culture do you see reflected in hip hop and then further in hip hop architecture? You know, like, that was really something that you know, really intrigued me, because I see it everywhere. You know, my A+ in my group is first generation.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, in his attitude and the way he operates, and you know, his connection to family and to a place. He's a different kind of guy than, say, me, who grew up 4 houses away from him.
Yeah.
You know, so where do you see yourself and your Jamaican roots in this?
Yeah, well, to answer the first part of the question specifically, about how I see my experiences as a Jamaican reflected in hip hop culture and possibly hip hop architecture, you know, James Garrett is gonna like this, and my sister as well, Nina Cook John, that, you know, we have this saying in Jamaica, that goes to turn your hand make fashion, which means, literally translated, turn your hand to make a fashion, which more succinctly means, you know, you're making something out of nothing, right? Like you get something, whatever you have this natural ability to turn it into something amazing, something hot. You know, it's like you know, if your pants are torn up and your belt's hanging off, then you're like, because you can't afford better pants or a better belt, you're like, oh, that's just the fashion, that's just the style, right? So you're turning these things that may be symbols of depravity, symbols of inaccessibility or being marginalized. You're saying, no, that's the hottest thing in the world. You don't have that, you're not up on that, right? So that's a part of Jamaican culture specifically that I see reflected in, you know, in hip hop culture all the time. And which is why I'm constantly drawn to things like informal settlements and informal architecture, favelas, you know, things where people have this inherent need desire to build community, and they know that they have to collaborate among themselves to create that community, to shape the built environment to reflect not only what resources they have, but also who they see themselves as people, right? So that is incredibly intriguing for me, and I don't think that architecture as a profession has fully grappled with that yet. I don't think architecture has found themselves in this idea that that they are not like the sole authors or the sole arbiters of what is architecture or what the built environment is. You know, the fact that only, you know, somewhere the estimates between like 1 to 5% of all structures actually get touched by a design professional, you know, should be a clue, an indicator that people are out there just doing it, right? They're just making it. But beyond that, I think it's, you know, getting into this hip hop project, this hip hop architecture project, I am completely, I'm the first one to admit that I'm not a hip hop head, you know, by the classic definition of a hip hop head, someone who can recite you all the lyrics to the MC Milk track, right? Like I was stumbling over that because I don't remember that track. But I remember, you know, being a kid, a Jamaican kid coming up to the States in the summers at my cousin's house in Brooklyn, jumping on the bed to Curtis Blow, you know, These Are the Breaks. And I remember hip hop being an influence in Jamaica during the 80s and mid 90s, and how hip hop influenced Jamaican music as much as Jamaican music influenced hip hop in the latter stages. And now we have a kind of back and forth where, you know, there's a time like 4 or 5 years ago when I was listening to the top 10 on the radio, and literally every single track on the top 10 was influenced in one way or another by Jamaican music, either directly or indirectly. Even that track by, even I was digging that Justin Bieber track, Sorry, and I was like, why do I like that so much? And then somebody's like, oh, it's a dancehall song. Oh my goodness, I can't believe I didn't recognize that. That's a dancehall. So I have this definitely have an inner sense of pride that my culture is a deeply embedded part of hip hop culture. It's part of the origin story, if you will. And yeah, you know, I grew up on dancehall. I am reggae to the core. I understand the structure of it. But at the same time, I understand my position in this country. I understand the global nature of hip hop as a culture, not just as a genre of music. And I think if you're describing that culture, I think the Jamaican music scene is definitely a subset or a tangent or an offshoot of that larger culture that is now affecting the entire world.
I would say, especially when we think about, you know, we get outside of this American concept. So we think about the UK and we think about grime, and then we think about, you know, I mean, where they have Pop Smoke now and drill music, and like it, they all mediate each other. You know, I mean, we can trace the roots, I say, back to toasting and all that. At this point, when you listen to a dancehall record, you're like, that's an old hip hop record. Hip hop record, you're like, that's an old dancehall record. You listen to any pop song, and it's like, this is either a dancehall or a hip hop record. But you think about reggaeton, all these things, they are. I feel like it joins us more than separates us. And I think that they're all sort of, if we think about a circle and then maybe points on a star coming out of that circle. I'm sorry to be visual about it, but like points on a star coming out of that circle
with 3 points. And then
the line, But I feel that it's all becoming one thing. I think we're right now all being unified under one drum, kind of, and I think it's a very powerful thing, because with all the dialogue on social media, with all the dialogue in the news, I really think, especially for African people and Afro-descended people, we're starting to realize that, oh wow, first of all, we have this shared experience, you know, which sort of galvanized us into this monolithic concept of Blackness, but also that there are more things in common than that separate us. And though we're all sort of these different points on this star, the central origin of that star is Africa, and it's vast and deep. And I mean, you look at Davido or Burna Boy, all these guys who are, you know, basically reggae, hip hop, they're everything, like they're everything. But I feel like the same pride I think you feel in having your culture, a small island, be such a huge influence on the entire planet, you know, has a grip on sort of cultural production, not just music, but other things. I feel a sense of pride in hip hop having, you know, reached back, made it all, been forged through trials and tribulations and years of oppression and all these things, and now making it back and then making it back again. It gives me a ripples from a wave type thing, going back and forth. And it's awesome to be in sort of this united thing. And I feel like all these cultures, musical cultures, are going to be very, very instrumental in forging what we're calling hip hop architecture, but it really is a lot bigger. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So maybe this is time for us to bring Jason back in, and maybe he can curate some questions from the audience.
I'm still in the room. This is fantastic, guys. I just really appreciate your ability to have this conversation with all of us eavesdropping. It's really been great to hear some of the things that have come up, I think, individually in conversations with each of you, and now coming to the surface. And Tajai, you're asking some of the questions that I wanted to ask of Sekou, so like right on. We've got a great number of questions. I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all of them, but let's try and hit some of them. And while I'm pulling those up, I'm also going to drop the YouTube link for the NOMA convention video that Tajai did for the announcement of the conference this year for By Design by Rap Noir. I think the first question that we should take is from Amanda Williams, who was earlier in conversation with Sekou. So she's asking, while it, being hip hop, isn't one thing, it is something. It does have a recognizable ethos despite different epochs in a relatively short existence in comparison to jazz or blues, etc. Can you speak to, for example, how various subgenres either influence a methodology or a formal aesthetic, such as rap versus hip hop versus conscious rap, etc.? And I think you've already sort of dived into a little bit of this in the conversation, but maybe just with more specificity to this idea of the subgenres, perhaps.
You want me to take this one?
Yeah.
I would say, I don't believe in subgenres. Let's start there, right? That is a tool created by the marketing machine, and it to me is a very Western way of viewing things. Is, hey, I'm going to have this big vast wall of teeny little vials that I have names on, and each one is a different thing. And if you step back far enough, I guess, away from this wall to where you can't see the little labels on it, all of a sudden you get the idea of what it really is. So I would say that, I mean, this is not a gotcha thing or anything, but I feel like it all influences in different ways. And hip hop is, as a lifestyle, like I listen to conscious rap, I listen to unconscious, like the worst of rap. Well, you know, I listen to pop stuff, everything. I feel like it's different flavor profiles. If you want to use a cooking metaphor, if you want to use a design metaphor, it would be like different rooms inside of an edifice. And maybe that is what hip hop architecture is like, hey, we've got this, I'm inside of a craftsman, but one room is my studio. One room is my daughter's, and my design studio is not my recording studio, and they have two different aesthetics, right? You know, my design studio is clean. It's I can think inside of it. My recording studio smells like, you know, the treats that my friends bring over all the time. You know, like it's got stuff on the wall, you know, the bedroom, the living room. I think these different spaces, when you look at them in their entirety coming together, create this sort of space for us to inhabit. But I don't think that anyone should be taken individually, or anyone should be given even more importance, because I think that is a capitalist and sort of industry way of looking at something, is creating something, distilling it in order to be able to sell it in a certain way. So I don't know if that covers it.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that. And again, you know, Amanda is always trolling me in one way or another. Yeah, so to say that hip hop is a thing, yeah, it is a thing, but it's even as it was originally defined, it's still defined by the outside, right? The outside is still defining what we can commodify, what can we essentialize, what can we take and put into nice little packages so that we can sell. You know, and I love that opening statement from Tajai that you know, he doesn't believe in subgenres. I love that. And the thing that is the thing is something that may be unspeakable, may be undefinable, and may be unbuildable. And that's what's so frustrating for most architects whenever they hear me talk about hip hop architecture, because they think I don't know what the thing is, and they think it's because I can't show them what it is. I can't draw it and I can't show it. But the thing is real, it exists for sure. It's kind of like a faith, right? But Harry Allen, I think, put it the best way. He calls it a super force. He's like, there is, and he uses this analogy, like this astrophysicist, you know, he cites some astrophysicist where he talks about it. He calls it a super force. That's that essence in what makes, you know, when a DJ cuts records differently from another DJ, when a b-boy, you know, kind of kills it on the dance floor, when a graffiti artist puts their tag on a wall or puts a beautiful piece on the wall, there's something there, you know, or when a real lyricist like breaks bars or puts words together, or has a flow that is so beautiful, but you can't put your finger on why it's beautiful. You know, like they've been trying to quantify Biggie's flow for ever since he died, for the last 20 years. But there's a super force at the core of that. And Harry Allen's like, if you can transpose that super force into architecture, then that is what hip hop architecture will be.
Huh. Boom.
Next.
But I think that's also great, because we can start to get into talking a little bit about like architectural style, and like, you know, Tajai's comment like just blows that out of the water. Like we're beyond needing architectural style. That's just a construct that is of an era that we're no longer in. And let's move on to the next great question. That was Amanda trolling us again, as usual. Thanks, Amanda. So James asked a good question. I think we've already answered a lot about what you learned about yourself and about the process of building the Close to the Edge exhibit in St. Paul. So I'm gonna just plant that there, and he's got a second part of this question. So Sekou, if you want to add anything more about what you learned about yourself while you're answering this, you can. So James is asking, like, Sekou, you went to Cornell University, and then you also followed up with the GSD. Tajai, you went to UC Berkeley, and can you guys speak about the unique relationships between students and alumni from your respective alma maters in the evolution of this hip hop architecture conversation from going back to the 90s until now?
Yeah, I love that question from James. And James is also not exactly trolling, but he's like planting like cognitive seeds, right? Because he one thing that I was gonna say at some point that I forgot to talk about is that when I was saying that I've been working on this thing for 6 years, the whole idea predates me by predates that work by at least 20 years, right? So there have been, again, we talk about Nate Williams, the godfather of hip hop architecture. He earns that title because he has been thinking about how to bring his hip hop identity into architecture studio since he was a first or second year architecture student in the late 80s, in like 88, 89, right? And finally did one of the most mind-blowing architecture theses that you ever heard of in 1993. And it was so legendary that, you know, people kept talking about it year after year after year while I was there. And, you know, I was at Cornell at a really important time when we had a kind of critical mass of Black and brown students at the school, which is why it's so important to get these numbers up at the universities, because when you have that critical mass, then you can have these conversations about things like hip hop and architecture. And so it was a kind of an incubator of this idea of hip hop architecture over a number of years of people going back and forth. And so in our alumni network, we've luckily stayed pretty close. You know, again, Amanda Williams, Lake Jafus, who's doing amazing work, Andres Hernandez, Nina Kubjan, my sister. You know, I probably shouldn't have started giving shout outs because I'm gonna miss people. But, you know, there's this really amazing cohort of people working and thinking at that time who are now still working and thinking at this time. And they are on the kind of leading edge, cutting edge of all of this conversation around Blackness and architecture right now, and all the conversation around hip hop and architecture for sure. And yeah, back in the day, we used to link with the Berkeley cats as well. So NOMA was this place where, you know, we could send 10 or 15 students from Cornell to a NOMA conference, and Berkeley would send like, you know, 5 to 10 students, and then there would be this intermingling, intermixing, and then they would be talking about hip hop architecture. There's a cohort of Syracuse students as well who are also talking about hip hop and architecture. So this idea really bubbled up and was brewing for a long time, and, you know, had to wait until we were all, you know, till 20 years later, till we were all actually licensed and practitioners and educators to actually revive the entire conversation. Meanwhile, Craig Wilkins was by himself just writing and thinking and doing all this stuff without any of our input, right?
You're also bringing up the idea of a collective, and I think that's something I wanted to ask you guys about, because there's the, what do you feel about the power of the collective? I mean, Souls was a group, and Hiero was a crew, and Black Reconstruction is a collective. And so each of you has been like highly prolific as individuals, but you're also part of these greater bodies that are achieving so much with all of the power and momentum of all of these individuals that make up each of these collectives. And I think also, like, Sekou, you fielded a lot of that answer to the last question. And I think, Tajai, to sort of put it to you, like, I think it is really about like you immersing yourself in this community of people working together to produce something, and just looking at the sheer amount of what you've been able to produce. Like, taking, for instance, we haven't really talked too much about Hiero Day and what you have achieved, not only as a community, but for the community. And so I wonder if you have something that you could say to just that idea of the collective and its power.
I really think, although it's been a long time coming, this is all sort of in its infant stages. And I think as people in this movement, whether we want to label it a movement or not, whatever it is, we have to be, we have to actively seek each other and actively convene and hash these things out. And maybe in public, but really in private, and understand everybody's strengths and weaknesses and what everybody brings to it. And then I think really continue to do this regularly in order to flesh out and really be intentional about the way this is moving, you know. But I feel, you know, there are no individuals on earth. That's this whole Western individualism. I did this. That's a farce. And I believe personally that the people who are in this movement, I think all have this understanding. So I don't think that ego is going to be an issue. I don't think that leadership or any of these things are going to be an issue. I really think it's logistics, because we're all sort of practicing, I mean, I'm still have tests to take. I still have, 3 or 4 buildings to design this week, like real life is happening. And as for me, a infant stage architect, I mean, a designer, someone who I just finished school in 2014. So as a rapper, I wield my style with great strength and ability. As an architectural designer, I'm still sort of finding my way. And so I feel like we need to convene so that I can learn from those masters in this movement, and I can see where I fit. And I think we all are kind of there. And I feel like works like what Sekou's putting together, not just the exhibits, but the actual book, these tomes that we might be able to look back and refer to that we don't even understand the importance of right now, are going to be very instrumental in sort of forging and galvanizing this collective. But to answer the question quickly, I feel like we need to convene regularly and really understand what is this movement, who's in this movement, what do we all bring, and then I think a lot of the larger questions will be answered. But we're all sort of on these separate islands and are just now kind of awakening to the fact that there are others. I felt a disturbance in the force. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of thing going on. But I think it's a really exciting time, and I'm excited to bring whatever expertise I can and learn from all these different masters. Every time we have one of these talks, I walk away with 3 or 4 pages of notes of what I'm going to incorporate into my practice, just as a designer, let alone as a hip hop architect.
Yeah, I think the idea of the collective is incredibly powerful, and I'm glad Tajai talked about the rejecting Western individuality. I think that's constantly reinforced in Western society. But if we think back, again, back to traditional African philosophy, it's always like the village bringing up the child, and it's the idea of Sankofa, looking behind so you can go forward, or lifting as you climb. There's always a kind of community that's involved in everyone's success and who can share in your success. As I recognized really early on in my own architectural education, that we are being trained to be individual authors, that we're trained to be sole practitioners. And, it's easy for me to talk about rejecting that as I sit here as like one person in an office, trying to practice by myself. But none of the success I've had in practice has been, can be solely attributed to me. It's always a collective support network. Like none of the things, like I have this brain trust of 6 people that I'm texting with constantly, that, that I don't feel comfortable making a move without getting their buy-in or letting them know that this is what's going on. And we get to share in each other's successes and wins because we're doing that. It's kind of like a mastermind, which is what it really is. And even, individual accolades, like the exhibition. The exhibition is a curation of 25 different people's work, right? One person can't get credit for doing that. That would be ridiculous. The book itself has all these multiple voices. I'm interviewing people and quoting people and taking transcripts from all these different places. And part of that is working like a DJ, looking at all these different sources and sampling and mixing them together. But part of it is showing that this is not a singular philosophy. It's not one person who becomes, the hip hop architect, right? It's a real collective voice, a collective movement. And even the BRC, the Black Reconstruction Collective, the earlier event, it was really powerful to see all of those voices come together. And I can tell you right there is no leader. There's no one person who's like, I am the leader of the BRC. Like we all are actively involved in that. And that became really clear when we initially made the decision. It was almost like right off the bat, as soon as we came together in that one room, we're like, this is a powerful room. We can't all be working individually in our silos on this one piece that we're gonna put into MoMA. It has to be something that we leverage to make a collective voice about Blackness and architecture in America.
And I think your responses are queuing up the next question. So what Joaquin is asking, and I think you've sort of answered the beginning of his question. What's your point of view about how current work as BIPOC designers are under the rigid norms of building/making? But he's going on to ask, do we surrender for the first years as young practitioners in order to make a living, or do we devote our time to finding ourselves and experimenting against these norms and forces?
Like I said, I finished in 2014. So I finished as a 40-year-old man with a family and you know, a lot of businesses so I have the luxury of being able to try to find myself. Also, I have the good fortune of working for two great individuals who brought me in and allowed me to do my thing. I didn't, you know, just start off having to do anything. They were like, hey, yeah, go, you know? So if you have the opportunity, I would say, please explore the limits of your abilities, spend as much time as you can finding your style and all those, but be real about your living situation. And also, I think that just limiting your creative process or design practice to the United States is severely limiting yourself. You know, we're in a seismic zone here, so there's so many regulations that just change my whole approach. Just because I don't want an earthquake to come knock it down. That I think, you know, I've got a hotel down in Panama. I'm gonna do some experimental stuff down there that, you know, may or may not work, but I at least have the freedom to do it because I'm not working under the strictures of the rules here. So I would say, of course, I mean, this is a lifelong process. What they say, you don't really get good till you're 60. Explore as much as you can, but be real about your living situation and maybe be intentional about that. If you want to explore and make some money, figure out ways to cross the two. But I really think in general, and this might just be me coming from a position of privilege, but the concept that you're going to work at one firm for 30, 40 years and work your way up, and that paradigm has been gone for every single profession on earth. So, you know, don't throw yourself in wholeheartedly, but always make sure that you have at least a little bit of an eye on the front door and take those opportunities, especially if you're young, don't have a family, don't have to be stuck in one place. You know, I can design anywhere, and I think looking outside of the States and looking outside of just how it's practiced here is a good start.
Yeah, we got a similar question. We got a similar question in the GSAP session earlier that, you know, that a few people answered. I didn't get to really answer. I've had questions like this by students in the past, and it's a tough call, right? Like, you are being trained and being evaluated under under one rubric, under one way of thinking. And then you're seeing all these things that are espousing different ideas and are sparking your mind to really want to bring your own identity and culture into it. And identity and culture usually is outside of or separate from the production of capital A architecture, the ones that we've been taught for the last 100 years, right? But I think that, you know, my typical advice is to learn the tools. Like, learn as much as you can, the fundamentals, the basics. Be as teachable as you can be within that space to come as close to mastery of that as possible. Because I believe if you do master the master's tools, then you have more ability to come close to dismantling the master's house. Even though it may not be possible to dismantle the master's house using master's tools, you can come a lot closer if you master those tools. At the same time, when you're producing work, you can produce work with the competency of having mastered those tools, the Western-driven tools, but use those in a way that is completely non-traditional and completely focused on an ability to, incorporate your own culture, your own identity, your own new philosophies and styles and ways of being in the world, in your architecture, right? It's not that easy to do in architecture school because of how you're evaluated, but keep pushing it. Like, if you actually have a mastery of those tools, you're not going to have almost any argument from anybody if the content is different, right? The content can be completely out of left field, but if the execution is brilliant, is impeccable, then there's almost zero argument.
I think that leads us into probably the last question that we'll be able to get to before we're out of time. So Carlos is asking, I think that design is a response to other people's choices and actions, and that is what makes it fundamentally social. So I'm really interested in processes of collaboration and mutual understanding. How do you think that dance as a practice that is fundamentally spatial can become a real tool process to open possibilities to recognize our own bodies and how we affect others and the environment around us? Do you think hip hop as a process can be a way to foster emancipation, perhaps something similar to the theater of the oppressed?
I need to go for it. I mean, I need to read that and digest it a little bit more.
I think that moving outside of architecture, hip hop and hip hop dance, breakdancing in particular, but what it's evolved into is one of many ways to achieve the nirvana that yogis seek, or the mastery of something, in this case your body, and I think it's a great tool in liberation, but it's internal. I don't know, dance requires space, open space, to a large extent, and so I don't know how that then translates into an architectural context. But as far as for personal liberation, as far as for personal elevation and meditation, I think it's one of the greatest forms of expression. And I think that's obvious, even down to the twerking in front of the police in these demonstrations. I mean, people laugh and razz that, but I'm just like, it is the ultimate expression of not giving a damn. Like, we will shake our asses in front of you, oppressive, evil folks, and you will like it. So I think it's as a practice, it's liberating. As a practice in hip hop, I think it's been great for conflict resolution, great for unifying people, great for elevating style with regard to clothes and all these types of things. And I think it is a great tool for liberation, but I think it's one of many that you have to have in your quiver in order to get to this point where we're not living on the streets, dying in the streets, hurting each other, etc.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I absolutely agree that it's a powerful tool when having the direct connection between dance and the body and the space of the body, right? In, how buildings respond to bodies very specifically, I think is a wonderful point of departure. And, I talk a little bit about that in the book as well. And there's a whole section that's dedicated to that. And, breaking down what breakdancing really is, and the kind of rules, the kind of internal coding and language of it, and how it can then get reinterpreted in different ways. It can actually generate several different specific techniques that are specifically derived from hip hop. But that also gets a bit formulaic as well. If you can completely decode breakdancing or b-boying and reprogram it or recode it into architectural language, it might create a really fascinating space that we've never created, but it's still this formula that then anybody can reproduce. It doesn't really get to that super force that Harry Allen is talking about. But because I have the look, there's this great quote that I just that I'm picking up from Amir Baraka, when he's talking about a typewriter, and he's talking about the nature of invention and Western invention, and how the body gets involved in that. It's a beautiful piece, and I'll just take the liberty of reading this right now. There's a typewriter, ? Why should it only make use of the tips of the fingers as contact points of flowing multi-directional creativity? If I invented a word placing machine, an expression scriber, if you will, then I would have a kind of instrument into which I could step and sit or sprawl or hang, and use not only my fingers to make words express feelings, but elbows, feet, head, behind, and all the sounds I wanted, screams, grunts, taps, itches, I'd have magnetically recorded at the same time and translated into word, or perhaps even the final expressed thought, feeling, would not be merely word or sheet, but itself the expression, three-dimensionalable, to be touched or tasted or felt or entered or heard or carried like a speaking, singing, constantly communicating charm. A typewriter is corny. And I love that description, just breaking down a kind of standard understanding of a basic tool, and then saying, we have to completely break our relationship to that tool by embodying a complete different relationship between the object and our bodies. It's beautiful. I mean, and if architecture could get even a tenth, a whiff of any of that, then it would completely change the game.
I think there might be time, if you guys will let me, to squeeze in one more question. I think that was beautiful, Sekou. I'm going to ask you to send that to me later so I can reread it again. So this question is, it's sort of a multi-layer question. The first part of it is essentially asking if you currently collaborate or work with Design Justice and Spaces, Deanna Van Buren, or with Prescott Rivas in Oakland. And if not, it's suggesting that. And Tajai, you and I have actually talked about elements of your work that would be good collaborations with Deanna. So just another element to underscore this. And it goes on to say, can the hacker-maker roots of hip-hop culture, music, have a positive effect or a new angle to approach architecture and design? For example, how do we connect muralists with designers using coal-resistance paint, for example? Or for this author of the question, hip-hop has always been about beautifying cities and her world through culture, and it seems to be gaining mainstream acceptance. So how can we create more partnerships with folks on the ground in cities and folks like y'all with skills to help with the design to make our cities better?
I've not bumped heads in a negative way, but come in contact with Prescott a few times. I feel like where I am in my life, I don't have a lot of money to dedicate to causes. So I always do sort of passion projects or community-oriented projects. So I'm here. I want to be a resource. I usually help small business people, you know, by not, you know, waiving my fee and sort of getting them into their spaces. So I think that for me, that's my way of giving back, is by giving of my skill. So I'm here as a resource. You know, you can Tajai at Sabi Design Build, and I'm open for whatever. It's crazy times right now, and everybody's at home and wanting to redo their home because they hate their house. But reach out to me. I think that it's important that we do work in these ways if we are going to sort of pull ourselves out of the position that we're in the States and globally. And, you know, I drive by these homeless encampments constantly. You know, a lot of my offices and things of this nature that I work in are in these areas. And I really want to get together with some young designers and some people who are living in these situations and figure out something better than a ready shed or a ready shed community to sort of start tackling the most unprecedented level of homelessness or houselessness or whatever is a blight that I've ever experienced. So I'm just saying, I'm here as a resource, and any young designers at any stages in their career, please reach out to me.
Tajai, if I could redirect part of the question a little bit to you again, because I think that I know one of the things that you've done during this whole pandemic is you've started setting up your garage with equipment to be productive, to like your laser cutting in your garage, your 3D printing in your garage, you're taking on this whole new level of sort of hacking from the home. And maybe that was from a little while ago, and now that you're a little bit more back in the office, isn't happening as much. But I wonder if you're seeing a connection between those efforts of the sort of like hacking the process of being an architect and your experience with what being a hip hop artist is, and that act of making between the two. Or is that a complete disconnect from your facial expression?
No, I'm yeah, sorry, excuse the expression. I think it's they're one and the same. I don't separate even though my architecture studio is separate from my recording studio. It's mainly for acoustical reasons. It's not because I'm using different parts of my brain. So I see the connection completely. I just sometimes I can put something so eloquently into song that I get high on the ability to get that finished product out. And then when I get into my maker space or I get into my design studio, the problems of the world are so overwhelming, and I feel so small with regard to my ability to affect them, that perhaps I need to create this mastermind, or in order to get to the point where I feel like I'm even making a difference. I really do get overwhelmed with regard, and that might have to do with my skills set as well. You know, so I see the connection, but the hacking with the music got that down. The hacking with space and with the built environment, I'm crawling, you know, and trying to learn how to do that while still trying to learn how to use these technologies. You know, it's like going to architecture school and never having used CAD before. I mean, you're in there learning how to draw with a computer. That's two things. It's not just one thing. And I welcome any help and any sort of guidance or any sounding board type of system to be able to hack more effectively, because I'm admitting that I don't feel as confident with my skills in that way to be of as much service as I can be, just as a musician, as someone who throws community events, as a public figure, and these things. So trying to get to it. I mean, it's a process, and I guess the joy is in the process, but I'm admitting that I am oftentimes overwhelmed by my lack of knowledge and ability in that respect.
Yeah, I've done a little bit in the realm of hacking. Actually did a little bit of a research project where we were looking at hacking into 3D printers and using them in ways that they're not supposed to be used, similar to using record players in ways that they're not supposed to be used, right? You know, like, how dare you put your fingers on that record, right? So, you know, and it was about like disrupting the print as it's coming out and moving the bed or moving the print nozzle, and had some really fun results from that, and wrote a academic paper around it and had some of those samples in the exhibition. That is a kind of beginning of a larger project that I started a little bit to work on with the Autodesk build space in Boston, and they shut down, and then that project kind of fell off, and I have some other ideas for projects, but right now I'm just kind of like, you know, there's so many things and so many projects, and it's kind of gotten a little bit deprioritized, but there's some desire to explore that space a bit more, for sure.
Well, thank you both. I think that we've probably stretched, especially Sekou, who's in a different time zone, as long as we possibly could. This has been a tremendous conversation, and it's, I think, Tajai, you hinted at the fact that this is something that might need to happen again. Or we were talking about collectives, and you're talking about a frequency of meeting. So maybe we can try and bring you all back together for another conversation in the future. I know that there is hope that we could, or that the West Coast could bring the hip hop architecture exhibition on the Edge of Cool, the birth, to the West Coast. So maybe we'll have another excuse to have another event. Keith, let me hand it back to you.
I should also plug, but in terms of another event, I should also plug the fact that Tajai and I are going to be talking again on October 15th as part of the NOMA conference. Well, it's me, Tajai, and about 5 other people having a kind of round table about hip hop architecture. Ujiji Davis, Craig Wilkins, Demar Matthews, James Garrett Jr., and one other person, I forget who. But we're all going to have this conversation. So if you register for the NOMA conference, you'll see that on the Thursday lineup, October 15th.
And that link is in the chat for anyone who hasn't already registered.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you both, Sekou, Tajai. This was a fantastic evening. I can't think of a better way to launch our partnership with MOAD. I'm inspired and intrigued and want to talk to you both more. So hopefully we can find some way to like bring the show, Sekou, and like do something, you know, in real life, as I guess they say, IRL, rather than on the screen. But this was just really amazing. So thank you both from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, Jason Anderson, for connecting Tajai and Sekou and CCA and making this happen. And thank you, Moad and Elizabeth, for like helping us kick this off. I hope this partnership continues for years and years into the future. Have a blessed night, everybody. Take care, and hopefully we will see you at another event soon. And go to the NOMA conference. The more events that I hear about that are sort of percolating up, the more I realize that I will basically not be working for a few days straight. Next week, I suppose. It's as early as next week. So good night, everybody.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.